Hello, welcome. I hadn't done any live conversations in a long time, and YouTube just made this feature available where we can actually do vertical live streams. So I'm just testing it. I didn't announce it or anything. So if you decide to join me, welcome. I'm Masood Raja. And this is by way of just testing this vertical live streaming. And I hope to make it sort of a daily feature. But if you join me, just let me know in the comments. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Welcome. I think it's Atika and Muhammad Imran. Um, Okay, so that's Atika. I am working on intergeneration trauma of partition. That's a really good question and probably not my area of expertise, but there are a couple of good books. There is one by Dr. Amritjeet Singh and others that was called Partition Revisited, I think. Just do a search for Dr. Amritjeet Singh and his edited volumes. I think that's really an interesting book because it takes into account what the traditional scholarship on partition was and what the contemporary scholars think about it. So that kind of makes it generational. Now, I'm assuming you are writing from Pakistan. So another aspect of Pakistani scholarship on the partition, how is it different from India? Now, in Pakistani historiography, or especially in what was called Pakistan studies, um, the partition is seen as, of course, a positive thing because the outcome was creation of Pakistan. And if you look at the Indian writings, mostly mainstream Indian writings, they call it Batwara in Hindi, and it's seen as a tragedy. Tragedy not because Pakistan was created, tragedy because India was divided. So you have to keep in mind the subtleties of how people view the partition. And then I think intergenerational will be some of them, like the latest book that won the Booker Prize, Reg Samadhi, right? The Tomb of Sand is a generational aspect of the partition, right? The story focuses around the grandmother who was born pre-partition and then her children and their children. You could use that as a possible text. I'm not very familiar with any Pakistani texts in English that deal with it. Of course, in the older Urdu writings, right, Nadar Log, I think it was Shaukat Siddiqui, and even a lot of mentors' work. Allah Mianji, I think, was by, what's his name? So, I mean, there are some really older works already available. So I would highly recommend looking into Dr. Amritjeet Singh's book, reading up on even like the Subaltern Studies Collective and their later volumes that deal with partition, and then figure out where you want to go with that. Let me see. Sorry, this is like, I'm surprised because I didn't announce this and there are already like 15 people. And thank you, M. And then how can we come out from this trauma where we only discuss isms like feminism, colonialism? When will we be able to be mentioned in the discussion of European people as the head people? I don't really understand that question. Um, what is a head people? I think I get the sense of your question is that when would our scholars and their work be centered and not just be peripheral to mainstream writing. I mean, part of it is that we need to produce scholars who do work like that, right? I mean, that's an absolute necessity, but also wherever you are in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, like how many times you actually go and read the scholars who are from your part of the world and respond to their work and build on their work. I mean, I'm not a big scholar, right? But how many Pakistanis actually go and read my work and cite it, right? So part of it would be you articulating your points of view with the knowledge of the discussions going out in the West. I mean, that's pretty much the sum total of my work always. You know, I know my Foucault, I know my Derrida, but then I also know my Ibn Rushd, then I also know my Iqbal. So that's what I've tried to do in my work. And any post-secular literary criticism, uh, I honestly do not know any books. To me, literary criticism mostly is secular, right? If you read Marxism, that's secular, but I'm not familiar with the technical term post secular literary criticism. I've never used it, but maybe if I do some research on it, I should be able to record a video on it. Yasmin, welcome. Do suggest some research lens for working on Palestinian authors. Well, there is a lot of work on Palestinian authors. You can check my student's book, and that's by Hella Cohn Bloom. You can check my other Palestinian student's book. Her name is Basima Shaheen. And and of course, you know, Palestinians are the most productive writers in the Arab world. So you can go to, you know, early Palestinian writings, you can go to Mahmoud Darwish and contemporary Palestinian writers. I think if you just do a general research of what has been published about Palestinian writings, you will be surprised to know the number of materials that are available. I mean, Laila Abu Lughad, you can read her work, and and you will have to figure out not necessarily how the Palestinians are representing themselves, but based in your location, where you are, how are Palestinians viewed, let's say in your country, in your culture, and why, right? And then how do your poets and scholars and writers engage with the question of Palestine? I think that would be a more subtle way of working on Palestine. And Muhammad Imran, welcome. Suggests some readings on decoloniality after than those of, okay. So you already have two major scholars of decolonial studies. I would highly recommend Walter Menvolo, and then Crenshaw is another one. My own former colleague, Priscilla Yabara, has a wonderful book on it. And other than that, to be very honest, my reading on decolonial studies is not all that deep, partially because I focus mostly on my own discipline, but also since I'm out of academia, I haven't had much chance to read a lot. Okay, Salma Zay, I am working on migrant community dynamics through diasporic meditations and a post-colonial approach. Okay, so if you're working on migrant communities anywhere, I mean, part of important thing to understand in that is how people have thought immigration and migration. There's a wonderful book by Saskia Sassen, right? And I think it's called, if I'm not wrong, An Anatomy of Globalization or something like that. But do some research on Saskia Sassen because she articulates in one of her books this tiered aspect of immigration and migration, that there are two levels to it, right? One is the high-end immigration and migration. These are technical experts, doctors, engineers. they enter the metropolitan cultures on a completely different level, like people like us who are educated, have access to more resources. And then there is what she calls the lower end of migration and immigration. These are your migrant workers, your factory workers, your restaurant workers, right? And most of the times, the stabilization of any given metropolitan society depends on the low end labor of immigrants. And they're the ones who are castigated, who are ostracized, who are targeted. So I think if you go with that subtle understanding that even in immigration and migration, there is a class system and then there is a class bias, I think that would be very useful. And let me scroll down. Mohammed Imran, sir, please suggest some reading on, I think I already dealt with that. And Ashraf, my doctoral viva is going to take place in about a month. I work on ethics of diplomacy in the Islamic intellectual traditions. Any advice on how to conduct myself in the viva? That's a really good question, and I would love to read your work on Islamic diplomacy. But think of it, I mean, even the popular representations of Islamic diplomacy, right? It precedes the current regime of human rights and whatever was constructed, right, post Second World War. There were always those ethics that were foregrounded even during the times of war, not just the early Islam, right? You can go to the teachings of the Prophet, but if you want a historical example, and this is in Philip K. Hitti's account of Islamic history, this is not a Muslim historian. And when he gives you an account of the fall of Jerusalem, right, when um, Salahuddin Ayyubi has invested the city and city is about to fall, his own ulama come to him and asks him, what are your terms? Because you can't just wipe out everyone in the city. You have to offer them the Islamic terms, which are pay a tax and you are free to go, convert to Islam and live as equal citizens, don't leave the city and live under protection, right? These are some of the conditions that a Muslim conqueror must offer, right? And so Ayyubi famously then not just even offers those terms to the city, but actually pays from his own treasury for the Christians who wanted to leave Jerusalem. So these are some of the big instances of Islamic ethics, of international relations, or dealing with people even in confrontational situations. Now, also keep in mind these are ideal situations. These are the lessons that a lot of our right-wing radical Muslims have themselves forgotten, right? It's very clear in Islamic history that burning green crops is forbidden. Killing women and children is absolutely forbidden, right? Targeting those who are not fighting you is forbidden. Someone who was just fighting you and throws down their weapon, striking them is forbidden. These are all the ethical rules and the laws that exist in Islamic jurisprudence. So it's not only that we keep jumping up and down and say we have ethical standards, we also need to criticize those of our own people who forget these rules, right? And then infuse the world knowledge with these knowledges, reminding the world not to prove that we are civilized people, too. I mean, we don't have the burden of proving that. What's happening in Gaza has already taught us that civilization is a very limited term. But to also remind our own people that this is where we came from, these are the best practices of our faith, and then maybe have an impact in their actions. But a really wonderful topic, and I would love to read your work. Um, okay, Astika Singh, try to go through Anachal Malhotra as well. She is, oh, good, that's a really good suggestion. suggest some books on diaspora theory. That's really a good question. Do I know any books on diaspora theory? I mean, I do not have any books in mind, and sadly, I don't have my books here these days. Otherwise, I could have looked it up for you in my library. Okay, this is probably outside of your area of expertise, but I'd appreciate if you have any suggestions of book that compile information on the latest in eco-criticism. I do not have the list, but if you need a good book that would give you references to that, that is just look up Priscilla Ybarra, right? Priscilla Ybarra. She does South American eco-criticism. Then, of course, Crenshaw, and even part of the work by other South American, but also Latina scholars. But if you just look up Priscilla Ybarra's work, she will obviously refer to the big names in eco-criticism, and you can then go from there. Okay, so this is really interesting because I just didn't announce this at all, and I just was trying to test this of going on live, and 18 of you have joined me. I'm really grateful. Thank you so much. And while I have you, I would also encourage you to, look through the videos on the channel. And those of you who know Urdu, you probably already know that I also have an Urdu channel now, so I'm slowly building that up. And then if you have any suggestions, you can always send them my way, through your comments. So let me see, what else do I have? From where can we explore, the various approaches of colonization employed by colonizers, like their approach was different in Asia from the one used in Africa? Well, I mean, yeah, that's a really good question. So I would say if you read any books on post-colonial studies, but I highly recommend Robert Young's big book on post-colonialism, because what that does is it kind of teaches us what different approaches were used by the French and then by the United Kingdom. And I think he's the one who gives us this discussion of the two broadly philosophical schools of colonization. Okay, so the French believed or worked through what he calls the Bergsonian model, like Henri Bergson, right? And that in that model of thinking, the natives, you thought of them as children, right? So you will still treat them as children, but they could be trained, right? Whereas the British model was what he calls the Hegelian model, where the natives are absolutely seen as these objects who must be constantly kept under control. So these are like two philosophical lineages of colonialism. And then if you want to see what happens in Africa, of course, you can read Fanon, right? Nkrumah. These are, or any of the African scholars, Ngugi Thiong'o, Chinwe, because they explain it within the African context. Any scholars, people like Edward Said and others who talk about the Levant and the Middle East would give you how the Middle East policy worked. And then there is no dearth of scholars who write about Indian colonialism. You can start from Partha Chatterjee, Subaltern Studies Group, Gayatri Spivak, and they are the ones who will explain those aspects within the specificity of that. These are some of the scholars or schools of thought that I can mention off the cuff. Okay, so I have a video on third, I don't have a video on third space, and that's Homi Baba. And then Foucault's heterotopia, I'll try to do video on a video on that. Thank you. Give a little guidance regarding converting a thesis into an article for publication. So if you go to my channel, there is a there is a playlist called Writing Tips. And in that, I have dealt with how to write an academic article, but also how to convert a dissertation into a book proposal. I think if you go through those videos, you will have a rough idea of how to convert a thesis into an article, right? But roughly, the process, when you have a thesis, that means you have the raw materials for an article already, right? Beyond that is you following the process of how to truncate it and shorten it into an article form. And for that, if you follow that playlist, right, as I mentioned, it's called Writing Tips, you will see that there is a step-by-step process in different videos where I go about, how to plan, write, and publish an article. That should be helpful to you. Okay, Ashraf, thank you. I'll try to do these more often. To be very honest, today I was just testing it, so I'm so glad all of you uh, joined up, and I'll try to do more of these. And you're welcome, Saima, and Imran. You're welcome too, Mona. Okay, let's see what you have to say. We are working on analyzing a novel in Iraqi literature entitled Frankenstein in Baghdad. Would you please, sir, enlighten us about the way necropolitics can be used and an approach in... Okay, so that's a really good question. So remember, the concept necropolitics is offered, if not in opposition to, then as an addendum to Foucault's biopolitics. So in order to really employ politics, you have to understand what Foucault means by biopolitics, right? Or biopower, right? And then in order to really clearly understand a clear theorization of thanatopolitics or necropolitics, you will have to go and read Achille Mbembe, right? Because he's the main theorist on it. But don't just rely on Mbembe's discussion, right? I would highly recommend reading up Foucault's biopolitics, right? And then when you have the understanding of both, then you can go to, Iraqi literature, any literature that deals with death of the people, death of the culture, death of a society, any kind of politics that relies on death as a mobilizing structure and not life, which is biopolitics, as a mobilizing structure. Okay, so this is Nadia. Will you be delving into Homi Bhabha's theory of hybridity anytime soon? I know you have briefly covered it in an episode, but yes and no. So, I mean, Bhabha, I have intentionally not tackled. And the reason is that I require a deep rereading of Homi Bhabha before I do anything worthwhile on him. And I didn't want to do like a slipshod work. And so I did a couple of videos like on mimicry and hybridity because I realized maybe I have a fair grasp of those concepts. But I do plan to, if possible, in the near future, start recording step by step, word to word by word, like, my understanding of the location of culture. I can't promise when, but that is on my agenda, and it's only a question of time, right? Having time to reread him and really understand him better. Okay, Ilnaz, welcome. Okay, so the subject of third space, third space is being theorized differently by Baba, I think Edward Soja is the one who was the theorist of it, but I think he deals with it in terms of physical urban spaces. But if you just do some research on just the concept of third space, you will see that, yeah, Baba would come up, but a lot of theorists of urban spaces will come up too, right? And then you can go from there and see how you mix the two and use it. Okay, bioarc. I have never heard of this necropolitics and feel fairly aware of cultural studies. I must read. Yeah, so necropolitics was offered or theorized by Echelima Membe, right, in the African context. And I couldn't like really elaborate it off the cuff, but it is in response to biopolitics. So roughly stated, what is concept of biopolitics or biopower in Foucault, right? What Foucault is basically suggesting that at a certain point in European history, the figure of the sovereign stops offering themselves as capable of dispensing death and start articulating their own authority as dispensers of life, right? So power commits itself discursively to suggest that their job is to protect life, right? That's biopower. Biopolitics is when policies are made under that register. So, censuses, counting people, declaring certain constituencies as harmful to the people, right? Ostracizing any agents or people who might contaminate and endanger life, right? So, the figure of the sovereign then justifies its function and its existence through works that save life or protect life. Now, we all know that in the process of doing that, a lot of life is destroyed as well, or ostracized or stigmatized, and that is Foucault's point. So, necropolitics then was offered as a competing and almost an opposite concept by Achille Membe. And as I said, it's been a while since I read him, so I'm not going to hazard an opinion here, but when I have time, I'll read up on it and think a little and maybe record a video on it. Okay. Okay, you're welcome and BioArch. Okay, yeah, bioimperialism, of course. Yeah, but I do recommend HLMMM's work. Would you be willing to discuss Derrida's The Animal That Therefore I Am whenever you have the time? Absolutely, I would love to do that. I did attempt a video on Plato's Pharmacy. It's available. I mean, I love Derrida, and to be very honest, I don't find him that hard. But just like any other work of Derrida, it requires a careful reading and reflection. So, yes, I will put that on my list. So, all right. So, thank you so much, you all, for joining me. And I think I'm going to end this here. And this was, as I said, a test, but surprisingly, so many of you joined me here. I'm really grateful for that. And next time, I will announce these things in advance so that you can prepare and we can gather some questions. And I will see you, next time when I decide to do this. So the Black Atlantic, absolutely. I would love to do that. Not today, because as I said, I'm living away from my home. I teach in a different town now. So I don't have my library with me. But when I do, of course, Paul Gilroy's, not There Is No Black in Union Jack would be a good book to discuss. But yes, And all right, then, thank you so much for joining me. And I don't even know how to uh, stop this live stream, but I guess like pressing that cross up there will do it. But thank you so much. And I will try to make this, a regular feature. Thank you. Goodbye. Khuda Hafiz. Maas salam. Right. Bye bye.